Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Justin Johnson on my module DD211, Understanding Politics, Ideas and Institutions in the Modern World. Chapter 18, the European Union, page 176. Commission and the ECG as more or less faithful agents of member states and by extension of the Council of Ministers. We've seen them working in the service of transnational society, and as 𝕬𝕕𝕤𝕦𝕝𝕖 has also points out, it may be helpful to consider the EU governance as a hybrid form. The central conceptual device is not the isolated ideal type, but rather a continuum running from pure intergovernmental politics to a supranational politicity in which EU institutions possesses jurisdiction of authority over the individual member states in specified policy areas. The form of the supranational polity is an open question. It could be organised along federal lines. It could take the form of island of regulatory authority corresponding to discrete tasks, or it could take the form of a strongly member state-driven process, where delegated authority is carefully circumscribed, monitored and controlled. To the extent of the EU, a supranational form of governance, we are entitled to ask about the source of its authority if a supranational political system is making, implementing and enforcing collectively binding decisions for citizens of the EU as a whole. On what basis is the rule exercised, and how does it relate to the authority claimed by the member states? This is intended explored further in section 6 in examining moves towards increasing supranationalism. Page 177. Governments of the EU, institutions and political actors, having explored the development and ways interpreting the EU, it is also worth examining its governance. We will now look at the main institutions and political actors within the EU. Historically, the formation of major legislation has been intergovernmental means by the sign of treaties, but once agreed by member states, the implementation and enforcement has been by supranational means. We can see here the terms used, explanatory models above are now used to categorize the EU's various institutions. The main intergovernmental institutions are the European Council and the Council of the European Union, more commonly known as the Council of Ministers. The main supranational junctions are the Commissions of Parliament and the ECG. European Council. Today, the intergovernmental European Council, which is composed of heads of government. It is important European interrogation. It decides strategic political direction. The accession of new policy priorities in recent years, it becomes the default location for handling crisis and blocking decisions that are otherwise stuck since the Lisbon Treaty in 2009. The European Council has its own president, who is elected by the Council for a period of 2.5 years, which can be renewed. Page 178. The Council of the European Union. The Council of the European Union, often referred to as the Council of Ministers, and hereafter referred to as much to avoid confusion. On the other hand, it involves ministers from member states acting different technical councils or configuration. These configurational councils include agriculture and fisheries, foreign affairs, and economic and financial affairs. The leadership of the Council of Ministers is held by each state for 6 months on a rotating basis, with the exception of the Foreign Affairs Council, which, since the Lisbon Treaty, is now headed by the High Representative for Foreign Affairs. The Council of Ministers shares much of the decision-making power as legislator with the European Parliament, but also managing most of the implementation of EU decisions by its constituent governments. Since 2000, it has developed a significant permanent secretariat in Brussels to support on which work those areas that have remained more intergovernmental, such as cooperation, policing, and justice. The European Commission serves both the bureaucratic and a partial executive of the EU and can be considered as one of the most supranational of the EU institutions, in some way acting as a type of EU cabinet, McCormack. The Commission is headed by the President of the Commission, who is appointed by a 5-year term the European Council on the basis of the result of elections of the European Parliament. That so-called Skitsy candidate system is public facing and can be found in its responsibility for particularly policy areas, all of whom are nominated by their national governments but are obliged to act as Europeans. It makes legislative proposals that the European Parliament and Council of Ministers may accept, amend or reject. It also guards and enforces existing treaties and legislation, administers and manages the EU and executes some policies as such. It shares executive functions within the Council of Ministers and with member states, and is constrained in what it can propose for legislation by interests of other institutions. As a result, the Commission engages in intensive coordination with all institutions and member states to minimise the chances of running into blocks further into the legislative process. The day-to-day work of the Commission is carried out by 27-strong colleague of commissioners, headed by the President of the Commission, their personal staffs, and the 32,000-strong Commission bureaucracy, which are organised into specific policy areas such as energy, economic and monetary affairs, environment and internal market and services. Generally speaking, the Commission formal powers have been confined by influencing deliberations of the Council and discharging its will. I'm going to leave it there because I am absolutely flabbergasted. If anyone's writing comments in my live, I cannot see.